Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The GPS said I was at 8,047 feet above sea level. The weathered sign by the road said 7,892 feet. My altimeter watch showed 9, 10, and 5 feet. And according to every single map I'd checked before leaving Denver that morning, this stretch of Highway 28.5 shouldn't exist at all. I'm telling you this because I need someone else to know. I need someone to understand why I haven't slept properly in 3 weeks, why I sold my car, why I refuse to drive anywhere that requires going through the mountains anymore. But most of all, I need to know if anyone else has seen that town, the one that appears exactly 13.7 miles from Denver, the one where the elevation changes depending on who's measuring it. The one that shouldn't be there. If you've driven it, if you've seen what I've seen, please leave a comment. Tell me I'm not losing my mind. Because what happened to me on October 3rd, it's still happening. Every night when I close my eyes. And now, the story begins. The morning started like any other freelance photography gig. Sarah Chen from Colorado Living magazine needed shots of abandoned mining towns for their November issue. Easy money. I'd done it a dozen times before. Old wooden structures against mountain backdrops, rusted equipment telling stories of boom and bust, that sort of thing. I left Denver at 5 a.m. sharp, coffee in the cup holder, camera bag in the passenger seat, classic rock on the radio. The plan was simple: drive out to Fairplay, catch the sunrise over the old structures, then loop back through Buena Vista for some afternoon shots. I'd made this drive before. Many times. But this time, something was different. It started small. Around mile 67, just past Bailey, my phone's GPS flickered. Not unusual in the mountains. Cell towers are spotty, but then it came back showing I was somewhere else entirely. According to the screen, I was simultaneously on Highway 25.5 and nowhere. Just a blank spot on the map. I pulled over at the next scenic overlook to reset my phone. That's when I noticed the first sign. Elevation, 830-47 feet. I remember thinking that seemed high for this stretch of road. I'd driven it enough to know the elevations by heart. Photographers need to know these things for calculating sunrise times and weather patterns. This area should have been around 700-800 feet, but signs can be wrong. Old, damaged, whatever. I kept driving. Mile 73, another elevation sign. 740-45 feet. That made no sense. I'd been climbing steadily. The engine was working harder. My ears had popped twice. How could I have lost 900 feet while going uphill? I checked my altimeter watch, the expensive one I'd bought for hiking 14ers. It'd read 880-51 feet. 3 different numbers, none of them matching. The road curved ahead, disappearing into morning shadows between the pines. I slowed down. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just off. Like when you're walking upstairs in the dark and you think there's one more step than there actually is. Mile 89. The radio started picking up a station I'd never heard before. KGHT 99.9. The DJ's voice was strange. Not accented exactly, but the cadence was wrong. The pauses in weird places. Good morning, travelers. Temperature today reaching a pleasant 72 degrees at our current elevation of, well now, that depends on who's asking, doesn't it? Static consumed the rest. I tried to find the station again, but the dial just gave me dead air. Mile 103. The trees were wrong. I know that sounds crazy, but I know Colorado pines. I photographed them in every season, every light. These were similar, but not quite right. Like someone had described a pine tree to someone who'd never seen one, and they'd done their best to recreate it. The needles were a little too long. The bark patterns spiraled the wrong direction. Small things. Things you'd only notice if you really looked. I was looking hard. Because by mile 117 I realized I didn't recognize anything anymore. The road was still Highway 28.5. The signs confirmed it. But the landscape. Where were the familiar peaks? Where was Mount Sherman, Mount Lincoln? They should have been visible by now. Instead, there were mountains I'd never seen before. Jagged things that hurt to look at directly. Peaks that seemed to shift position when I wasn't watching them. Mile 25. My phone completely died. Not low battery. Dead. Like it had never been charged. The clock on my dashboard started running backward for 30 seconds, then stopped entirely at 7:43 a.m. It had been 7:43 a.m. for the last 20 minutes of driving. Mile 3021. I saw the first car I'd encountered in an hour. A blue sedan, looked like a Toyota Camry, normal, comforting even, until it passed me. The driver's seat was empty. The car was driving itself, maintaining perfect speed, turn signal blinking as it changed lanes, no one inside. I almost drove off the road, mile 13.5. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in the span of seconds. Frost spread across my windshield even though the heater was blasting. I had to pull over to scrape it off. That's when I saw the town in the valley below. It wasn't on any map. I knew this stretch of Highway 25 like the back of my hand. There was no town here, no valley, no anything. But there it was, rooftops and streets laid out in a perfect grid, smoke rising from chimneys, cars moving along the roads, normal, peaceful, completely impossible, mile 13.6. The sign appeared. Welcome to elevation population varies altitude. Yes, my hands were shaking as I took the exit. The road down into elevation was impossibly steep. My ears popped constantly up and down, like the pressure couldn't decide what it wanted to do. The thermometer on my dashboard kept fluctuating between 14 degrees and 97 degrees. The frost on my windshield would melt, then instantly refreeze, then melt again. But the town itself looked normal, aggressively normal, aggressively normal. A main street with diagonal parking, a diner with neon signs, a small grocery store, a post office, the kind of small Colorado mountain town you'd drive through and forget 5 minutes later, except for the details. The street signs were wrong, not the names, those were typical enough. Oak Street, Main Street, First Avenue. But the letters, sometimes they seemed to shift, like they were written in 2 languages at once and my brain couldn't decide which one to read. I parked outside the diner. Meg's Place, the sign said. Or maybe it said Megan's Rest, or Megan's End. It kept changing every time I blinked. I needed answers. And coffee. Definitely coffee. The bell above the door rang as I entered. Normal sound, comforting sound. The inside looked like every small-town diner I'd ever been in. Red vinyl booths, checkered floor, pie case by the register, 3 customers. An elderly man reading a newspaper, a middle-aged woman stirring sugar into her coffee, a teenager in a Broncos jersey picking at scrambled eggs, all normal, all wrong. The elderly man's newspaper was blank, completely blank, but his eyes tracked across it like he was reading. The woman had been stirring her coffee since I walked in, the same motion, over and over. The spoon never clinked against the cup, the coffee never swirled. The teenager's eggs weren't getting any smaller no matter how much he ate. Coffee, hon? The waitress appeared beside me, perfectly normal. Blonde hair and a ponytail. Name tag said Deb, smile a little too wide. Yeah, yes, please. My voice cracked. She poured from a pot that I swear was empty. The coffee that filled my cup was the perfect temperature, the exact color I liked it even though I hadn't added cream yet. Yet. You're from Denver, not a question. How did you, we get a lot of folks from Denver, mile 13.7 and all that. She winked like we were sharing a joke. I don't understand. Sure you do, hon. You counted the miles. You checked the elevation. You found us. She refilled my already full cup. The question is, what are you looking for? I was driving to Fairplay, for work, photography. Oh, a photographer. Her smile got wider, impossibly wider. You should take some pictures here. We're very photogenic, very memorable. She walked away before I could respond. The teenager with the Broncos jersey looked up at me. His eyes were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just white. She's right, you know, very memorable. You'll remember us forever. Then he went back to his eggs like nothing happened. I left $5 on the counter and ran. Outside, the town had changed, not dramatically, subtly. The grocery store was on the wrong corner. The post office had moved 3 buildings down. Or maybe I was misremembering. Maybe the terror was making me confused. I decided to leave, immediately, but my car wouldn't start. The engine turned over fine. All the electronics worked, but when I put it in drive and pressed the gas, nothing. Like the town itself was holding me in place. Car trouble? A man in coveralls appeared at my window. Jim, according to his embroidered name. I run the garage just up the street. Happy to take a look. I had no choice. I followed Jim to his garage. It looked exactly like every small-town garage. Oil stains on the concrete. Calendar with classic cars on the wall. Coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. Let me guess, Jim said, not even looking under the hood. You came from Denver. Mile 1307. Elevation signs not matching up. How did you? Same thing happens to everyone first time through. The town, it needs to get to know you first. Make sure you're the right kind of visitor. He finally popped the hood. Yup, just as I thought. You're asking the wrong questions. What? You keep wondering where you are, what this place is, but that's not the right question. He pulled something from the engine. It looked like a spark plug, but it was pulsing with a faint blue light. The right question is, why did the road bring you here? The road didn't bring me anywhere. I was driving to... The road brings everyone exactly where they need to be, mile 13.7 from Denver. The elevation that doesn't match any map. He put the glowing spark plug back. Some folks, they pass right through, never even see us, but others, the road knows they need to stop. This is insane, is it? Jim closed the hood. Try it now. The car started immediately, but I didn't drive away. I couldn't, because Jim was still talking. You want to know the truth about elevation? We're the place between places, the town that exists in the spaces maps can't measure. Every mountain town you've ever driven through, we're all of them and none of them. That doesn't make sense. Sure it does. You've driven these mountains how many times? You ever notice how sometimes a drive takes 3 hours and sometimes it takes 4, even though you're going the same speed on the same road? You ever wonder where that extra hour goes? I had noticed that. Everyone who drives Colorado mountains has. It comes here, Jim continued. Those lost minutes, those missing miles, they accumulate in places like elevation, towns that exist in the gaps. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to leave soon, and when you do, you'll either remember everything or nothing. That's how it works. The road decides. I should have left right then, started the car, drove away, never looked back. But something Jim said stuck with me. Why did the road bring you here? I'm a photographer. I document things. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. And here was a town that shouldn't exist, filled with impossibilities, and my camera bag was sitting right there in the passenger seat. I grabbed my Canon 5D Mark V here, the expensive one, the one that had never let me down. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Jim's voice carried a warning. Why not? Some things don't like being documented. Some places exist specifically because they're not on any map. But I was already raising the camera. The viewfinder showed Main Street perfectly, the diner, the grocery store, the post office that may or may not have moved. I pressed the shutter. The camera died instantly, not the battery, the whole thing, like every circuit fried at once. Told you, Jim said, the town doesn't like proof, but I had other cameras, film cameras, older ones that didn't rely on electronics. I pulled out my grandfather's Leica, full roll of black and white film already loaded. This time I was smarter. I didn't aim at the buildings. I aimed at the spaces between them, the shadows, the alleys, the margins where things might hide. Click, the camera worked, and in that split second when the shutter opened, I saw them. They were in every shadow, every doorway, every window, people, but not people. They looked like someone had tried to draw a human from memory but kept getting the proportions wrong. Too many joints in their arms, necks that bent in impossible directions. Faces that were almost right, but not quite. They were watching me, all of them, dozens, maybe hundreds. Oh, you can see them now. Jim's voice had changed, deeper, resonant. That's unfortunate. What are they? Residents. The real residents. The real residents were just costumes, masks. Things they wear when visitors come through. He tilted his head at an angle that made my neck hurt to look at. Usually visitors can't see through the masks, but you had to go and look in the margins, didn't you? The teenager from the diner walked by. In the bright sunlight, I could see through his skin like tissue paper. Something else moved underneath, something with too many eyes. We don't mean harm, Jim continued. We just exist, in the spaces between, the elevations that don't match, the miles that don't add up. We've always been here. Before Denver, before Colorado, before humans decided to draw maps and measure everything. What do you want? Nothing, everything, to be left alone, to be remembered, to be forgotten, he shrugged. And I heard bones that shouldn't exist clicking together. Mostly, we just want to keep existing in our impossible space. The film camera was still in my hands. I raised it again. You really shouldn't, Jim started. Click, click, click. I photographed everything, the impossible angles of the buildings, the shadows that fell the wrong direction. The mountains in the distance that seemed to be breathing. And the things that wore human faces like ill-fitting masks. With each photo, more of the truth revealed itself. The town wasn't just impossible, it was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Like reality had made a mistake and tried to correct itself, but only made it worse. The diner wasn't a diner. It was something pretending to be a diner based on a description of a memory of a diner. The street wasn't paved with asphalt. It was paved with something that looked like asphalt if you didn't look too close. If you did look close, it had pores. It was breathing. And the sky was the worst part, because there was something massive moving behind it. Like the blue was just a painted backdrop and something incomprehensibly large was pressing against it from the other side. You've seen enough. Jim's hand, or the thing pretending to be a hand, landed on my shoulder. Time to go. But time to go. Each word came from a different mouth that opened in his face. I ran to my car. It started immediately. The road out of town was suddenly clear, obvious, like it had been highlighted just for me. As I drove up the impossible incline, I looked in my rear-view mirror. The town was folding in on itself, buildings sliding together like shuffled cards. The things that had been pretending to be people stood in the street, watching me leave. They weren't wearing their masks anymore. I wish I could describe what they really looked like. But human language doesn't have those words. Human minds aren't meant to process those shapes. The last thing I saw before elevation disappeared entirely was Jim. He gave me a wave with an arm that had become something between a tentacle and a geometric equation. Then, nothing. Just empty valley where a town had been. I made it back to Highway 245, the real Highway 245, the one on maps. Mount Sherman was right where it should be. The elevation signs made sense. My phone came back to life, showing 37 missed calls from Sarah at the magazine. It was 2 p.m. I'd lost 6 hours. The 30-minute drive back to Denver took 30 minutes. Every landmark was where it should be. Every mile marker exactly 1 mile from the last. Normal, safe, real. But I had the photos. 24 pictures on a roll of 36 exposure film. I drove straight to my darkroom. I needed to develop them immediately. I needed proof that I hadn't lost my mind. The first photo, Main Street, but not the Main Street I remembered. This one was clearer. I could see through the pretense. The buildings were hollow, like stage props. Behind them was nothing but swirling darkness. The second photo, the diner. The customers were there but wrong. The elderly man reading the blank newspaper had too many fingers. They split and reformed as he turned the page. The third photo, the mountains. They had faces. Massive, ancient faces carved not by wind and water but by something that predated geology itself. The fourth photo was black, completely black, but not empty. There was something in the darkness, a shape that hurt to perceive even in a still photograph. The fifth photo. I can't talk about the fifth photo. I burned it. Had to. It was looking back. Photos 6 through 20 showed the truth of elevation, a town that existed in the spaces between reality, a place where things that shouldn't be real congregated, pretending to be normal, feeding on something. I never figured out what, but the last 4 photos, those were the worst, because they weren't of elevation. They were of Denver, my Denver, the real Denver. But in the margins, in the shadows between buildings, in the spaces people don't look, the things from elevation were there. They'd always been there. We just don't see them because we're not looking in the right spaces. That thing in your peripheral vision that disappears when you turn to look? That shadow that seems too dark for the amount of light in the room? That person you pass on the street who seems off but you can't explain why. They're from elevation, or places like it, the spaces between, the measurements that don't add up. I sold my car the next week, told everyone I was becoming environmentally conscious. The truth? I couldn't drive anymore. Every mile marker made me count. Every elevation sign made me check. Every small town made me wonder if it was really there or just pretending to be there. I destroyed most of the photos, kept 3, proof that I'm not insane, or maybe proof that I am. I'm not sure anymore. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Remember I said it was a roll of 36 exposure film? And I took 24 photos. When I developed the roll, all 36 frames had images. The last 12 photos I didn't take. Something else did. After I left, using my grandfather's camera that was sitting in my bag in the car, they're photos of me, driving away. Taken from inside my own car. In the last one you can see the thing sitting in my back seat. It looks almost human, almost. It's smiling at the camera. I've checked my apartment 17 times, looked in every closet, every shadow, every margin. I haven't found it yet. But sometimes I hear something breathing in the spaces between the walls, in the elevation between floors, in the gaps that don't quite add up. Last week, I noticed my apartment number had changed. It used to be 14B, now it's 14PP5. The landlord insists it's always been that way, but I remember it was 14B. The night before last, I found a coffee cup in my kitchen that I'd never bought. It was sitting in the cabinet, right where I keep mine. Inside was coffee that was still hot. Perfect temperature, perfect color. The cup had a message printed on it, "Welcome home, mile 13.7. That's when I truly understood. Elevation doesn't let you go, not really. You can drive away from it, but it remains embedded in your measurements, your numbers, your counting. It seeps into the margins of your everyday life. I started noticing other things. The elevator in my apartment building sometimes takes 3 seconds to go between floors, and sometimes it takes 7 seconds, but the floors are the same distance every time. A crack in my bathroom mirror that wasn't there yesterday, but somehow I remember seeing it before. The clock on my wall that sometimes runs backward for just a second when I'm not watching it directly. The things from elevation are patient. They're learning how to hide in plain sight, learning how to wear our world like we wear clothes. Mile 13.7 from Denver. The elevation that doesn't match any map. Don't look for it. Don't count the miles. Don't check the elevation signs. But if you do find it, if the road decides you need to be there, take my advice. Don't look in the margins. Don't take pictures. And whatever you do, count the frames on your film before you leave. Because they follow you home. The things from the spaces between. They follow you home and hide in the measurements that don't quite match, in the corners where the walls don't quite meet at 90 degrees. In the minute between 3:33 and 3:34 a.m. that sometimes lasts just a second too long, they're probably in your home right now. You just haven't looked in the wrong places yet. But once you start looking, once you start noticing the spaces between, you can never stop. Sweet dreams. I started researching. Obsessively, there had to be others. People who'd experienced Highway 25 the same way. People who'd found elevation or one of the other impossible places that exist in the gaps. I dug through forums, Reddit threads, obscure travel blogs. Found scattered posts from drivers claiming strange things about Colorado mountain roads. Unexplained time losses. Elevation signs that didn't match. Towns that seemed to exist for only moments before vanishing. Most of the posts were deleted within hours. The accounts went inactive. Then I found the subreddit, Our Missing Measurements. It had been created 4 years ago but only had 3 active members. The posts were fragmented, desperate. Screenshots of impossible mile markers, photos of elevation signs showing numbers that shouldn't exist. One user had posted a video of a town that seemed to flicker between being there and not being there. The last post from that user was timestamped 3 months ago. It's in my measurements now, in the spaces. I can feel it counting me. If you're reading this and you've been to one of these places, it's already inside, already learning your rhythm, your pulse. How to. The post ended mid-sentence. I made contact with the 2 remaining active users. Their responses came almost immediately, like they'd been waiting for someone new to join, like they'd been expecting me. They called themselves Mileage and Gauge. Mileage wrote, "You're at the phase where you're trying to rationalize it, looking for proof. That phase lasts about 3 weeks. Then you move into the acceptance phase. That's when it gets worse." Gage responded, "It's already in you. Think about it. Every time you count something, your steps, your breaths, your heartbeats, it's listening, learning your rhythm. Once it knows your frequency, it can exist in any measurement you make. It becomes part of your personal mathematics." They explained things I hadn't wanted to understand. The things from elevation don't just exist in the gaps of geography. They exist in any space where measurements don't align. In the lost seconds between clock ticks, in the fractions of miles that accumulate over years of driving, in the space between your pulse and your breathing. There are more of them than there are of us, Mileage wrote, and they're getting better at hiding. They're studying us. Learning human behavior from observation. Soon they won't need to wear masks at all. We'll just accept them as part of the world. Gage added, "Some of us are trying to fight it. We've been documenting the locations, trying to map the impossible places. There are 17 confirmed sites across Colorado, but the list keeps growing, and they keep spreading to other states. Oregon, Nevada, Wyoming. The gaps are connecting." I asked them what I should do. How I should survive. "You don't survive," Mileage wrote. "You coexist. You accept that part of you is now in elevation, that you'll always carry those 6 lost hours, that your measurements will never be quite right again. You learn to live in the margin." "Stop fighting the coffee cup," Gage advised. "Stop checking for things in your apartment. The more you search, the more you invite them to search back. The more you count, the more they can trace your location. You need to become unmeasurable. Blur your own edges." I asked them what they meant. Gage never responded. But Mileage sent one final message. "Change your routine completely. Don't go to the same places at the same times. Don't follow any pattern. Don't count anything. Not steps, not calories, not days. Become random. Become impossible to track by standard measurements." 3 hours later, Mileage's account was deleted. The subreddit was scrubbed 2 days after that. Completely gone. Like it had never existed. But I'd taken screenshots. I've been trying to follow Gage's advice. I change my routes daily. I refuse to mark time with precision. I eat at irregular intervals. I sleep when I'm tired, wake when I wake. No alarms, no schedules, no measurements. But it's getting harder, because I can feel myself changing. The way I perceive distance is becoming fluid. I'll drive to my neighbor's apartment, and it will take either 4 minutes or 20 minutes depending on something I can't quite name. My reflection in the mirror sometimes has different proportions, like it's being redrawn in real time. Yesterday I caught myself doing math in my head without meaning to, calculating the distance between my apartment and downtown, 104 miles, or 106, or 103.7. The numbers kept shifting in my mind like they were being offered as options. That's when I realized something horrifying. I'm not trying to escape elevation anymore. Part of me is already there. Part of me is still in that town, still asking questions in that diner, still taking those impossible photographs. And that part is slowly pulling the rest of me back. I could feel it in the gaps, in the margins of my consciousness. stopped seeing it weeks ago, but I don't think it left. I think it merged. If you've experienced something similar, if you found a place that shouldn't exist, please leave a comment below. Share this story. Subscribe for more investigations into the impossible places. Because I'm still looking for answers, still trying to understand why the road chose me, why it showed me elevation. And most importantly, I need to tell someone what's happening to me before I forget how to use human language, because last night I woke up in the middle of the night. And I realized I'd been counting my heartbeats in a rhythm that didn't match my pulse. It was a different rhythm, something else's rhythm. And when I listened carefully, I could hear it too, beating inside my chest. In the measurement space between one beat and the next. I'm not going back to elevation. I'm never going back, but I'm not sure I ever actually left. The road has been inside me the whole time. Mile 13.7 isn't a place on a map. It's me now, and it's learning to count in my frequency. Story number 2. To thermometer outside, read 114 degrees. Phoenix in July, it's like standing inside an oven with a hairdryer pointed at your face. But when I opened Unit 66 at the public storage on East McDowell Road, my breath came out in a cloud of frost. I'm telling you this because I need someone to believe me, because what I found in that storage unit, what's still happening there, someone needs to know before more people disappear. If you're listening to this late at night, maybe alone in your bed, I want you to pay attention to every detail. Because by the end of the story, you're going to have questions that might save someone's life, maybe even yours. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened. My name is Marcus Chen, and 3 weeks ago, my Uncle Jerry died. We weren't close, hadn't spoken in maybe 5 years, so when the lawyer called saying Uncle Jerry left me something in his will, I figured it was probably his beat-up Ford Ranger or maybe that signed baseball from the 2001 World Series he always talked about. Instead, I got a key and a storage unit, Unit 66 at the public storage on East McDowell, the lawyer had said, handing me a small brass key that felt oddly heavy in my palm. Your uncle paid for 10 years in advance, still got 7 years left on the contract. What's in it? I asked. The lawyer shrugged. That's between you and whatever your uncle stored there. He just said, and I quote, Marcus will know what to do with it. I almost threw the key away. I mean, who needs someone else's junk? But curiosity got the better of me. That Saturday morning, I drove my Honda Civic through the blazing Phoenix heat to the storage facility. The place looked like every other public storage in America. Orange doors, white buildings, security cameras on every corner. The manager, a woman named Dolores with hair dyed the color of a penny, barely looked up from her phone when I showed her the paperwork. Unit 66? She frowned. That's in Building C back corner. You related to Jerry? He was my uncle. She gave me this look, I can't quite describe it, like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Well, good luck with that one. Jerry was particular about that unit, very particular. What do you mean? Just be careful in there, okay? Some of these old units, they got problems. Mold, rats, you know. She went back to scrolling on her phone, but I caught her watching me in the reflection of the window as I left the office. Building C sat at the back of the property, tucked behind 2 larger buildings like it was trying to hide. The asphalt shimmered with heat waves, and I was already sweating through my t-shirt by the time I reached the orange roll-up door marked 66. The moment I put the key in the lock, I felt it, a rush of cold air seeping out from under the door. Not cool, cold, like opening a freezer. I pulled up the door, and the temperature dropped 40 degrees instantly. My sweaty t-shirt suddenly felt like ice against my skin. The unit was maybe 10 by 20 feet. And completely empty except for 3 things: a wooden chair in the center, a cardboard box on the chair, and frost, actual frost, covering the walls, in Phoenix, in July, where it hadn't been below 70 degrees in 3 months. I stepped inside, and my shoes crunched on the frozen condensation coating the concrete floor. My breath came out in white puffs. The walls weren't just cold, they were covered in a thin layer of ice, like the inside of a freezer that needs defrosting. The cardboard box on the chair had my name written on it in Uncle Jerry's shaky handwriting. Inside, I found a leather journal, a flashlight, and an old Polaroid camera, the kind that spits out instant pictures. There was also a note: Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm dead. And you got the unit. I'm sorry to put this on you, but there wasn't anyone else I could trust. The journal explains everything. Whatever you do, don't close the door while you're inside, and never come here after midnight, Jerry. I picked up the journal. The leather felt ancient, brittle. The first entry was dated 3 years ago. Bought Unit 66 at an estate auction. Previous owner died, no next of kin. Got it for $50. Thought I'd scored big. Found out why it was so cheap. The cold isn't natural. Something lives here. Something that feeds on warmth, on life. I've been feeding it, keeping it contained. If I stop, it gets hungry. When it gets hungry, people disappear. I almost laughed. Uncle Jerry always was a bit eccentric, loved his conspiracy theories and ghost stories, but the frost on the walls was real. The cold was real. I could feel it seeping into my bones, making my joints ache. I flipped through more pages. Each entry got progressively more frantic. It spoke to me today, not with words, but I understood. It's old, older than Phoenix, older than the desert. It was here first. Found it behind the dumpster at Safeway. I hate this, but it's better than the alternative. Mrs. Morrison from Unit 31 got too close last month. They found her car but never found her. It's getting stronger. The cold is spreading. Dolores noticed. I told her it was a broken AC unit. She didn't believe me. The last entry was dated a week before Jerry died. I'm sick. Cancer. Docs say 3 months if I'm lucky. Can't keep this up. Going to pass it to Marcus. He's smart, stronger than me. Maybe he can find a way to end this, or at least keep it contained. I'm sorry, kid. I'm so sorry. I stood there, shivering in that impossible cold, trying to process what I was reading. That's when I heard it, a sound like wind through dry leaves. But there was no wind in the sealed storage unit. The sound came from the walls themselves, from behind the frost. I grabbed the flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dim light filtering in from outside, illuminating the back wall. The frost there was thicker, and as I looked closer, I could see patterns in the ice, shapes that almost looked like faces, dozens of them. Pressing against the ice from the other side, mouths open in silent screams, I slammed the journal shut and backed out of the unit so fast I nearly tripped. The Arizona heat hit me like a physical force, but I'd never been so grateful for it. I rolled the door down, locked it, and sat in my car for 20 minutes with the AC off, letting the heat soak into my frozen bones, but I couldn't leave it alone. That night, I did what any millennial would do. I Googled the hell out of it. Public Storage East McDowell Phoenix disappearances. Storage Unit 66 Phoenix. Unexplained cold storage unit Arizona. Nothing. Then I tried searching for the previous owner. Found an obituary for a man named Theodore Krasinski. Died 3 years ago. No family, no friends mentioned. Just a small notice in the Arizona Republic. But there was a link to another article from a year before he died. Local man claims storage unit is haunted. Demands refund. The article was mostly making fun of him, but it mentioned that Theodore claimed something was living in the walls of his storage unit, that it whispered to him. Promised him things if he would just feed it. The reporter treated it like a joke. The comments section was full of people calling him crazy. I found Theodore's old MySpace page. Yeah, MySpace. Still up after all these years. His last post was a video, filmed on what looked like an old flip phone. The quality was garbage, but I could make out the inside of a storage unit, the same unit, Unit 66, in the grainy footage. Theodore was breathing hard, the camera shaking. It's real, he kept saying. It's real and it's hungry and I can't do this anymore. I'm going to seal it. Brick up the walls. Maybe that will hold it. The video cut to black, but there was audio for another 30 seconds. A sound like singing, but not quite, like someone trying to harmonize with themselves, overlapping voices that didn't quite match, creating this unsettling discord that made my teeth hurt. The next day, I went back. I had to, in broad daylight, with the sun beating down. I figured I'd be safe. The parking lot was busier this time, families loading furniture, college kids moving boxes, normal Saturday afternoon stuff. Dolores was at the front desk again. She watched me walk past without saying anything, but I felt her eyes following me all the way to Building C. I opened Unit 66. The cold hit me again, but this time I was ready for it. I'd worn my winter jacket, the one I hadn't touched since moving to Phoenix from Milwaukee 5 years ago. The frost on the walls had spread, creating these intricate patterns like a giant spider web of ice. I started taking pictures with the Polaroid camera Jerry left me. I don't know why, my phone would have been easier. But something told me the old camera would work better. As each photo slid out and slowly developed, I noticed something my eyes hadn't caught. Shadows in the ice, moving shadows. Even though nothing in the unit was moving. You're Jerry's nephew. I spun around. A man stood in the doorway. Elderly, wearing a Vietnam vet cap and a flannel shirt despite the heat. His skin looked like leather left in the sun too long. "I'm Tom," he said. "Got Unit 68, next door. Knew your uncle pretty well. He told me someone might come for his unit after he passed." "Did he tell you about?" I gestured at the frozen walls. Tom's face went tight. "Jerry was a good man. Did what needed doing. You planning to keep up his work?" "What work? What is this thing?" Tom looked around, making sure no one was nearby, then stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Your uncle never told me exactly what it was, but I've been here 15 years, and I've seen things. People go missing. Always renters from this building. Sometimes they find the bodies, frozen solid, even in summer. Sometimes they don't find nothing at all. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, handed it to me. It was a list of names and dates, going back 20 years. These are all the renters who disappeared, Tom said. Notice anything? I scanned the list. The dates were random at first, but then I saw it. They started clustering. Groups of disappearances, then long gaps, then more clusters. The gaps? I said. That's when someone was feeding it? Tom nodded grimly. Theodore figured it out first, started leaving food, animals mostly, roadkill, strays, kept it satisfied for a while. When he died, your uncle took over. Now it's my turn? Or people start dying again. I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was crazy. But the frost creeping up the walls was real, the impossible cold was real, and deep in the ice, something was moving. What does it eat exactly? I asked. Heat, life. Whatever you want to call it. The warmth that makes living things, living. Your uncle, he had a system. Every 3 days, he'd bring something, leave it in the unit overnight. By morning, just frozen husks left. And if I don't, Tom pointed at the list. See that cluster at the top? 8 people in 2 weeks. That was the last time someone tried to stop feeding it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the unit, the cold, the faces in the ice. At 3 a.m., I gave up and drove back to the storage facility. I know Uncle Jerry's note said never come after midnight, but I had to understand what I was dealing with. The facility was different at night. The security lights created harsh shadows, and the desert wind made the metal buildings creak and groan. I used my key card to get through the gate. My footsteps echoed off the concrete as I made my way to Building C Unit 66's door looked different in the darkness. The orange paint seemed to glow, and I could see my breath even from 10 feet away. The cold was spreading. I unlocked the door, raised it slowly. The temperature inside must have been below zero. Ice crystals floated in the air like snow, and in the back of the unit, where the frost was thickest, something was moving under the ice, pushing against it, testing it. I turned on the flashlight, and that's when I saw her, a woman, frozen in the wall. Her eyes were open, staring right at me. She was wearing a public storage uniform. A name tag read, Melissa. I remembered that name from Tom's list. Melissa Cartwright, disappeared 6 months ago. They never found her body. But she wasn't dead. Not exactly. Her eyes tracked my movement. Her mouth opened and closed slowly, like she was trying to speak. The ice around her pulsed with a faint blue light. Then she smiled. Not a normal smile, too wide. Like her face was being pulled by invisible strings. Her lips moved, and even through the ice, I heard her voice, except it wasn't just her voice. It was dozens of voices, all slightly out of sync. Join us. It's so warm here, so warm in the cold. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. More faces appeared in the ice, men, women, even what looked like a teenager. All of them smiling those two wide smiles. All of them speaking with that horrible overlapping voice. Feed us or join us, feed us or join us. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran like hell, rolled the door down, locked it, and drove home breaking every speed limit. But I couldn't let people die, so the next day, I did what Uncle Jerry did. I went to the animal shelter, told them I'd found a dead cat by the roadside, needed to dispose of it properly. They gave me the body, wrapped in a black plastic bag, didn't ask questions. That evening, just before sunset, I went back to Unit 66. The cold seemed eager, pressing against the door. I rolled it up, threw the bag inside, and quickly closed it again. From outside, I heard sounds, crunching, tearing, and then a satisfied sigh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The next morning, I opened the unit. The bag was still there. But whatever had been inside was now just a frozen husk, drained of everything that had once made it alive, and the faces in the ice had receded, barely visible now. The cold felt less aggressive, almost content. I fell into a routine. Every 3 days, I'd find something. Roadkill mostly. Sometimes I'd buy whole chickens from the grocery store, tell the cashier I was meal prepping. The thing in Unit 66 didn't care, as long as it was fed, but it was getting stronger. The cold was spreading to adjacent units. Tom had to move his stuff to Building A. Dolores started asking questions, and the whispers, I started hearing them even when I wasn't at the storage facility, in my dreams, in quiet moments, always promising, always tempting. We could make you special. We could make you eternal. Just step inside, close the door. Let us embrace you. 3 weeks into this nightmare, I discovered something in Jerry's journal I'd missed before, a phone number, written in the margin of one of the pages. I called it. A woman answered, elderly, cautious. Who is this? My name is Marcus Chen. Jerry was my uncle.
I found your number in his journal. Long pause. You have the unit. Yes, God help you. Her name was Patricia. She was Theodore's sister. She knew about Unit 66, about what lived there. And she knew something else, something Jerry never wrote down. It's not from here, she said when we met at a Denny's on Thomas Road. She was in her 70s, thin, with eyes that had seen too much. Theodore spent months researching, found old Native American stories, Tohono O'odham legends about something that came from the sky, fell in the desert centuries ago. The tribes knew to avoid that spot. When Phoenix expanded, when they built the storage facility, they built it right on top. Can it be killed? Theodore thought so. He was working on something when he died, said heat wouldn't work, it feeds on heat. But there was something about absolute zero, about turning its own cold against it. She pulled out a folder, pages of Theodore's notes, calculations, theories, plans for some kind of device using liquid nitrogen and industrial freezing equipment. He never got to try it, Patricia said. Heart attack. But maybe you could finish what he started. I spent the next week studying Theodore's notes. He'd been brilliant, a retired physicist from ASU. His theory was complex, but the basic idea was simple. The entity fed on temperature difference. It created cold to draw in heat, like a vampire sucking blood. But if you could eliminate the temperature difference, make everything the same absolute cold, it would starve. The problem was, you'd have to be inside the unit to do it, and whoever was inside would freeze along with the entity. I kept feeding it, kept the routine. But I was building the device Theodore designed, ordering parts online, liquid nitrogen tanks, industrial sprayers, insulation gear. My credit cards were maxed, but what did that matter if this thing got loose? 2 nights ago, everything changed. I arrived at the unit for a regular feeding and found the door open, not broken, just open, like someone had unlocked it from the inside. Dolores was standing in the unit, her back to me. Frost covered her hair and clothes, but she wasn't shivering. Dolores? She turned, her eyes were frosted over, white as snow. But she was smiling. It's been calling me, she said, her voice layered with those otherworldly harmonics. For years, it's been calling. Jerry kept me away, but Jerry's gone. And you're not as strong as Jerry. She stepped aside, and I saw what was behind her. The ice on the back wall had melted away in a perfect circle, revealing a hole, a tunnel, leading into darkness. The cold pouring out of it was beyond anything I'd felt before. It burned. It wants to meet you, Dolores said. It's been so patient, so hungry. Feeding on scraps when there's a whole warm world out there. More people emerged from the shadows of the tunnel. Melissa, the missing security guard, an elderly man I recognized from the missing persons list, a teenager who disappeared last year, all of them covered in frost, all of them smiling. Join us, Marcus, they said in unison. It's so warm in the cold, no more pain, no more fear, just the eternal embrace of the void. I backed away, but they followed, slow, patient, like they had all the time in the world, because they did. Whatever they were now, they weren't aging, weren't dying. They were preserved, eternal, frozen in a moment of perfect, terrible transformation. I ran to my car, grabbed the device I'd been building. It wasn't complete, but it would have to do. 2 tanks of liquid nitrogen, a spray rig, and a timer, because I knew now what Theodore had really planned. Not to go in and freeze with the entity, but to seal it in absolute cold and hope the building contained the blast. You can't stop it, Dolores called out, still following with that unhurried pace. It's older than this world. It's seen stars born and die. You're just another warm thing. Thinking you matter. I dragged the equipment to Unit 66. The frozen people stood at the entrance, watching, waiting. The tunnel behind them pulsed with that blue light, and from deep within, I heard it, the true voice of the thing that lived in the cold, not human, not even close. A sound like glaciers grinding together, like the death of suns. Choose, the voice said, drilling straight into my mind. Feed me the warm world, or feed me yourself, but choose now. I'm done waiting. I looked at the device, looked at the tunnel, looked at the frozen people with their empty eyes and eternal smiles, and I made my choice. I activated the device and threw it into the tunnel. Then I grabbed the door and pulled it down. The frozen people didn't try to stop me. They just stood there, smiling. As I locked them inside with whatever was about to happen, the explosion came 30 seconds later, not of heat, but of cold. The entire building shook. Ice exploded from the ventilation gaps in Unit 66's door. The temperature dropped 50 degrees in seconds. Car alarms went off. Windows shattered. The lights in the facility went out. When it was over, Unit 66 was silent. The door was covered in ice 3 inches thick. Whatever was inside, whether the entity, Dolores, the others, they weren't making any sound. That was 2 days ago. The ice hasn't melted. The door hasn't opened. The facility is closed for maintenance, but I know they're trying to figure out what happened. The news is calling it a freak weather event, a microclimate anomaly, but I know the truth. And worse, I know it's not over, because last night I heard whispers in my apartment, felt cold spots that shouldn't exist, and this morning I found frost on my bathroom mirror in the shape of words: "You can't freeze the void, Marcus. We are patient, we are eternal, and we are very, very hungry." So I'm posting this story, sharing it with whoever will listen. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to watch Unit 66, make sure that door stays locked, make sure the ice doesn't melt, and if you're ever in Phoenix, if you ever pass by the public storage on East McDowell Road, stay away from Building C, stay away from Unit 66, no matter how hot it gets. No matter how inviting that cold might seem, because some things are meant to stay frozen, some doors are meant to stay locked, and some hunger should never, ever be fed. But here's what terrifies me most, what keeps me awake at night. Theodore's notes mentioned other locations, other storage facilities, other units that are always cold, even in the desert. Unit 66 might not be the only one, and if that's true, if there are more of these things out there, more people feeding them, barely holding them back, then maybe the real question isn't whether you believe this story. The real question is, what's in your local storage unit? What's behind those orange doors that never seem to open? What are your neighbors hiding in their garages, their basements, their sheds? Because I learned something from Unit 66, something Uncle Jerry knew, something Theodore died trying to prevent. The cold is patient, the cold is hungry, and the cold is spreading. One last thing, if you're listening to this late at night and you suddenly feel a chill that wasn't there before, if your breath starts coming out in little white puffs, if you hear whispers that sound like multiple voices slightly out of sync, don't investigate, don't be curious, just run, and keep running, because once the cold notices you, it never, ever lets go. Sweet dreams.